New York students are now eligible for free breakfast and lunch, regardless of household income. We'll talk about it. This is Nuance. I'm Mike Scala, and yes, we do have a few other topics not as positive, but we'll get into them as well. I'm joined, as always, by Jay Carter, also known as Timid, the hip hop artist and chair of BLM Tokyo. What's up, Jay? You like this free breakfast and lunch idea?
I do. I think it's beneficial. There have been numerous studies and stats that show that students who are hungry in school perform worse and not up to their ability level. And so if we can make sure that students are fed while they're doing their studies, we can they get better education. That means potentially a more promising future for everyone. I think it's a good thing.
Sure. Though, let's unpack this, right? Because there already were programs that would help people who came from
Right,
low income backgrounds, right? So,
right.
in theory, and I understand that theory doesn't always work out in practice, but people might say, in theory, if the student came from a background that wasn't low income, why should the government, why should the public have to provide their meal if they had the money, if their parents had the money or their family had the money already?
Listen, I get that argument. I absolutely can get that argument. And the, growing up, we always, there were always kids that were on, the free lunch program or discounted lunch program. And it just was not something that like bothered me. Like some people today, like a lot of this stuff that we're seeing today is people like unhappy that people are getting something that maybe they're not.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, yeah, they're getting it because they need it. And it's not like I felt like I was missing out. Like, oh, I'm being done unfairly because those kids are getting free lunch. Like it just was
Right.
never a thing. And so for people to take this position these days and to be upset, or to call into criticism some of this stuff is a little bit baffling and upsetting. Um, and so if they can expand this program to help everyone, I think it's good. But I can see a differentiation where they say, well, we can use it for the ones that are the most vulnerable among us instead of just
Mm-hmm.
everyone. I can see that
So,
argument.
yeah. So then, do you think, because you said people would recently start to show outrage over certain people getting benefits and others aren't, do you think that by making it free to everyone, you're alleviating some of that outrage? Is that what you're saying?
I think potentially you could be, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if their opposition was, oh well, then why don't I get it and you get it, and then and now it's like, well, everybody gets it. So now what's your outrage, right?
Right.
Are we waiting now? It might go. They just might not want the poor kids to get it, you know. Um,
Do you think people would make that argument though at this
yeah,
point?
absolutely.
Wait. So so now that the school year is here and everyone is getting these breakfasts and lunches, do you think there are some who are going to say it should be taken away only from the low income students, but everyone else should be able to get it?
No,
Oh,
no, 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 no.
okay.
I mean that by they wouldn't say it directly like that. What they
Mhm.
would say would be that the program shouldn't exist, period.
Right.
People should pay their own way. But
Right.
they're really meaning is they don't want poor people to get it, people who can't afford it to get it. Right? That's the same argument to say, oh, pull yourself up by your own
Yeah.
bootstraps. You
Yeah.
should be, discounting all other factors around. And that is very real. That's how we got a lot of the systems that we're in right now, right?
Sure.
Colleges used to be free. A lot of poor black folks were going to college. They didn't want that. So let's start introducing tuition so we can weed out some of the people coming through, right?
Mhm.
The gap in what is it, Medicare or Medicaid coverage. It's only there because some of those people didn't want a lot of black people getting on Medicare. So like let's introduce premiums because it's a weed people out. They can't pay for these things, right?
Mhm.
So there's a deep history. I mean, even what was it? I think the bar exam was introduced in a similar way, right? And so there's a long history of trying to weed out people in this country, and people basically, what's the adage, cutting off your nose to spite your face.
Right.
These are programs that help everyone, you
Yeah.
know, even if the most vulnerable among us are getting meals, them getting educated helps everyone, right?
Sure.
Rising tide lifts all ships.
Right.
It's like,
Right.
but
Right.
to be upset about that and then lose out on that opportunity for the country and the community because you're upset because they might be getting something, it's just it's ridiculous.
So you mentioned the bar exam. I'm not gonna down the bar exam because I evidently got one of the highest scores in the whole country. So I'm like, okay, I'm Mr. Bar exam here. Maybe I can go order that as a side
I'm
hustle.
not surprised that you did, but I'm not saying that.
No, I
I'm
got
saying
you.
the introduction of it.
Yeah,
If
yeah,
if
yeah.
I recall, and I don't remember the exact details, but if I recall, part of the reason for introducing the bar exam, because it didn't exist before, but part of it
Oh,
was there were too many people they didn't want becoming
right.
lawyers. And so like, okay, we need to put some kind of a barrier in place or a bar. Let's take that.
Yeah. Well, and this argument that you raised too about, you know, for example, saying, well, no one should get it because it's not fair. Let's level the playing
Right.
field, right? That reminds me of this idea now that people are pushing to replace the income tax with a sales tax that everyone pays the same amount, right? And they'll
Right.
argue, well, it's fair, everyone pays the same amount. But as you know, that's a very regressive policy because it's going to disproportionately benefit people who can't afford to pay that kind of tax.
Right. Yeah. I mean, for example, 10% of someone who has $100 has a greater impact than
Right.
10% of someone who has $100,000
Did I
or a
say
hundred.
a benefit? I meant disproportionately burden people who
Right.
can't pay that. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
all right. So back to the school lunches. We think it's a good idea. You know, one might say, like we said, that, well, if you don't come from a low income background, why do you need this? But to be honest, there are people I know complaining who I guess weren't eligible for this before, and they're saying that this is really making it hard for them, right, to raise their children. So the way the system was set up didn't seem to be fair in that regard, right? It didn't, it didn't seem to provide free meals to people who, to all students who needed them. Let's put it like that, right? That
Right.
there were many parents and families who were paying, and it was really hurting them and impeding their ability to live. We cite that study here on Nuance often, talking about what was it, a quarter? Was it a quarter or a half of
What?
New York families couldn't afford their bills, basically.
It was half.
It was half. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, when
At
they say,
least
well,
half.
people who need it already got it, maybe in theory, but not so much. It wasn't working out as intended, I
Right.
guess. Right.
So I think, oh, I'm sorry, you were
Well, no.
continuing.
So now we're at this point here where everyone in the public school system in New York is getting it, and even people in the private school system in some cases, which we'll get to. But before we even get to that point, I wanted to look at the numbers here because this obviously was allocated to the state budget, which included $340 million for school meals, which is $160 million year-to-year increase. And they're saying that this is going to to save the average family $165 a month per student in
Mhm.
grocery costs.
Right.
So does that number make sense to you? $165?
To me, it sounded incredibly high, but we did kind of crunch the numbers, kind of just a
Yeah.
rudimentary calculation where we're looking at if they're going to school 20 days out of the month, and we divide that by was that 20 meals out of that per
Really
student?
40 meals because it's breakfast and lunch, although I don't know how many you can be having the breakfast, right? I think probably more people
Yeah.
lunch.
What was it? 100, what was it?
$165, they're saying.
Yeah. It was 165 and you divide that by 40 and it came out to like $4.12 a meal.
So you
Uh,
divide that by 40. Wait, oh yeah, because you're saying that, right. So you're saying that's if they do 40 meals a month, averaging
right. So
20
that's 20,
meals
that's 2 meals a day, breakfast and
for 20
lunch, and then
days
they're going to school 5 days a week. So roughly about 20 days out of the
a month.
month.
Yeah.
So that's
Okay.
40 meals
40
total
meals
that's
a
being
month.
provided.
Right.
So it's about $4.12 per meal,
Okay.
um, which to me sounded a little high when you're talking about grocery numbers.
Right.
But then again, groceries are expensive now, especially. So,
Right. Right. And I think, I don't think they're assuming, I could be wrong, but I don't think when they do these calculations that they're assuming every child is going to have breakfast and lunch 5 days a week, right? They might look at
right.
the patterns, right, of behavior here and say, oh, well, people have lunch much more at school than they have breakfast. And so maybe most of that money goes towards lunch, actually.
It could be, but I think it would be beneficial. I think it's beneficial to have both of those.
Mhm.
Um, and I can see a reason why it would make sense now to roll it out to everyone. Because like you were mentioning before, like, the most vulnerable students were getting it, that, lower income were getting it. Um, and the people that were, let's say, middle class might have some issue and say, well, you know what, it's I'm struggling too. And especially now, like you just cited, 50% can't afford their bills. This will give some relief to
Yeah.
them
If that
as
number is
well.
true, that's a big number, right? $165 a month in savings that you'll get
Per student, per child.
per child.
If you got
Yeah.
two kids, that's
Right.
that's even more significant.
Right.
And so for a parent, even if they are middle class, lower middle class, this kind of savings can be helpful. And if the cost of living has gone up so much that the lower income group has expanded and the middle class has shrunk, that means even more people are having trouble
Hmm.
affording things. This helps everyone. And so to me, it does make sense to include everyone these days versus how it might have been before, where someone could afford everything off of a single salary.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, you either got to do something like this, or you have to really reevaluate what you consider to be low income or who's eligible for these free lunches, these free meals, right? Because
Right, because
it
it's
didn't seem to be
changing.
working. People were going into debt. I mean, I've heard parents locally talk about this, that they were actually
Right,
going into debt paying for their students' meals at school. You know what I mean? Like, that's crazy. No one should have to do that.
right.
We got a text message here actually saying Timid sounds so much better. Glad he looks and feels better. Well, there you go.
Oh, well, hey, whoever that is, thank you very much. I am feeling a little bit better. My nose is still a little bit stuffed up, but yeah, feeling better. Thanks.
Excellent. So let's talk about, because we have other topics to get to, but the last, I think, point we wanted to make on this one was this idea that it isn't only for public school students, right?
Right,
Um, it applies to some charter schools and non-public schools, and namely ones that participate in the National School Lunch and Breakfast Program to provide free breakfast and lunch. So that program, right, the national one, was providing, or I guess seeking to provide free meals for people who were low income or considered low income, right? And so what
right,
this is doing is it's saying if you are a school that is providing these meals, right, using this program, the
right.
state is going to come in and pay for you to expand that to all students. So you're no longer discriminating on the basis of income or what have you, right? If you're in the program at all, now you got to expand it to everyone who goes there.
Right. My question on that is that they're private schools, so they are charging tuition. People are paying to go to those schools. Why would the public be supplementing the school lunches why isn't the school using the tuition that they're charging their students to pay for the meals?
Right.
Why is the public put on a hook for their private school student
Yeah.
body?
And
That's my
it is
question.
that is a fair question, right? Because you're talking about the public's expense, right? I
Right.
mean, we can talk all we want about how it's saving parents money, and it is, and that part of it is great, but we can't
Sure.
ignore the fact that this is an expense of the state, meaning it is a taxpayer expense, right? So in some way, the public still is paying for it, right? And so
Right.
the question is, why should the public have to pay for private school students when they're supposed to be paying tuition, and it's a private school. It's not, that's not supposed to be the public's business.
Right. And a public school is public so that everyone is welcome and can join. Where the private school though, you're barred unless you pay the tuition, and tuitions are not cheap. So why should
Right.
the public be paying for that which they can't attend, right? Public schools, everyone can attend. It's public, it's open, anyone can get into it. So yeah, let's take the pool of money that everyone's paying in to put that. On the other hand, someone is going to say, and I bet this is what you're about to say, people that are sending their kids to private schools would say, well, then why are my tax dollars being used to help with the public schools?
Oh, I wasn't
Because
even going to
I'm
say
paying
that.
for private.
I mean, but that's you're right. That's an argument you hear. You'll hear people say, "Why should I have to pay property tax that goes to public schools when I don't have any children, or I don't have any children in public schools?" That
Right,
kind
right,
of
right,
thing, right? I think a libertarian might make that kind of argument often, right? Like I
right,
should I should be able to opt out of paying taxes because I don't use these services. But yeah, I
right,
think that's always a flimsy argument. I mean, we are a society. I mean, that's kind of like I don't know, maybe an appeal to rugged individualism or something, right? Like I just live my own
right,
life. I do my own thing. I shouldn't be a part of this. But no, we are a society, and it isn't just about your own kids or I don't go to the school, so why should I have to pay? No, you're
right,
paying to help educate your neighbors' kids and live in a better society, right? That we're all kind of
right,
in together, right? It's a collective thing.
right,
But I understand some people don't have that mentality, right? They don't want to be part of a collective, and then
right.
maybe they're better off living off the grid or something. But this is the world that we have, and that is what it is. But where I was going to go was, uh, why should some students at the school not get the benefit if others are, right? Because remember, this is only
Right.
applying to schools that are in the meal system already, right? So if they're not providing free lunches, they're not included in this. But if they
Right.
are, if they're providing them to some people at the school, which would be the people on a lower end, right, financially, then why shouldn't they have to provide to everyone? Um, why should you burden some students at the school but not others?
Um, yeah, I think in that situation, again, I question it with the private schools, and I would just like to hear with the justification more why the public should be extended into that. But for what you're saying there, it could also be that, someone make that same argument in the previous the standard free lunch or discounted lunch program, right? Why should
Right.
only some students receive it just because they're lower income? So what about everyone else? So
But the
I,
school, in this case, the private school is opting in to the free lunch program. And so
right,
they are endeavoring to provide free lunch or free breakfast to at least
right,
some of the students there, right? So
right.
if the school is volunteering itself to do that, why should you punish certain students? Why should only some kids get the benefit but not others who go there?
Well, I guess under this new rule or whatever that,
Mhm.
if it's trying to apply to everyone, then I guess there wouldn't be much of a differentiation. But
Right,
under the traditional model, it would be income based, right?
right, right.
How are they able to afford it? My question becomes then like, if you're having an income issue, how are you in the private schools in the first place?
Yeah, but
Right.
there's also financial aid. And there's probably scholarships too, right?
Sure,
Merit
sure.
based, right? There's all kinds of the ways you do.
Right. Yeah,
So
and so I think, if there are kids that are in those schools and they're struggling
yeah,
financially,
yeah,
then if there's assistance available and the school can provide, they should. If people are in there not, they don't need to. Like, if Elon Musk's kids were in a
right.
in a school, they don't need it at all. You know,
Yeah.
they
And I
they
agree, by
wipe
the
their
way, with the
butt
principle
with that
that
budget.
I agree with the principle that our taxpayer money should really be prioritizing students in public schools, right?
I think so.
That's where most of the students are. And
Sure.
that is our responsibility, right? Now, if you're a parent and you want to take your child out of that system, that's on you. But I think
Right.
in doing so, you're saying, I'm in some way forfeiting some of the benefit that I would get from the public school system, right? It's a balance, a trade off, maybe. Maybe you think it's better
Right.
for your family, but you have to realize you're not getting all of the public school benefits. And so I do question that too, but I'm looking at it also from the student's perspective, right? Now, like we're saying, this new policy says all students should be fed, right? Would it be fair to say, with that in place, if you go to one of these other schools, only some of the students get fed?
Probably not. If the rule is that all
Yeah.
students should be fed, it's
Right.
probably not as fair.
Right.
Um, Now, I could look at it, we were just questioning about, students in the private school system and saying like if you take yourself out of the public school system, maybe you're not going to be covered under some of these programs and services. I think there is an argument to be made about students who economically may be just barely able to get in or are in under programs
Mm.
because the idea is that in these private schools, you might have better education, but you will have better networking and better opportunities for your kids. And so for students who are in maybe lower income to get that opportunity to reach that network, to be able to expand for their future opportunities, we should probably find some way to make that happen as well. So saying, if you can't afford it, you shouldn't be in there could limit those opportunities. If there's a pathway that you can get in, you know what I mean? So someone going to, for example, someone, I don't know, I've been listening to Jay-Z lately, so let's say someone from Marcy, from Marcy Projects, um, was, if they went to state college versus they were able to get into Harvard through some program, the connections and the networking and the opportunities
Mm-hmm.
going to Harvard could open up for them,
Mm-hmm.
would could dramatically alter their future and raise them out of
Right.
perhaps that lower income status, their families generationally out of that status. I think similarly, we could look at that in some of the public school versus private school opportunities as well. So I think that has to be factored in. Is ultimately, if we want,
Future. Yeah, that's interesting. So you're saying that people who go to private schools are better situated for the future generally, and therefore they don't need the benefits now to the same degree?
no, I'm saying that not necessarily they are better suited,
Mm.
but I think there's probably, and I don't know statistics on it or anything that, but there's probably there have other opportunities. Private schools can be more focused. Private schools are generally attended by people who have the money to be there. And if you've got the money to be there, you probably, your family is probably connected with some ways, maybe lawyers, maybe doctors, maybe
It
real
doesn't need to
estate
be though.
moguls.
That's certain schools. And what if it's just a religious school? A Catholic school,
I
or
think that's completely a separate one.
but
I
that's
don't know
still
if
considered a
religion.
private school. It's a private school. It's not a
Yeah,
public school. Yeah.
sure, sure, sure. But I think in some cases, so not in all,
Yeah.
but right, some cases, just being in that environment
Hmm.
increases your opportunities later on. Right. So for
Right.
example, if you're in that school and these are attended by, let's say, people who are in a higher income bracket in different fields, your network is going to be stronger when you're out into the workforce later. And
Yeah.
so that the
If you can
opportunity to be
eat,
lifted.
I mean, you're not going to have it in network if in 4 years if you can't eat today.
Well, absolutely. No, absolutely. I know I'm saying that so people being saying, okay, they're pulled out of the public school system, so
Hmm.
they shouldn't get the benefits, doesn't allow for instances of people that might be lower income, lower middle class that got into these private schools. They may be barely making it, but the potential for being there could raise them higher economically later.
But how does that affect the school lunch system? So you think that they have less of a case for it now because they're better off? I don't
I'm
understand the
saying there's more of a case, there could be more of a case for it,
for them to
right?
get school lunches
Yes,
because they have more connections. I don't understand.
because they're in a new opportunity space. So let's say, for example, um, we're talking about the school lunches. Like, let's go with the kid from Marcy, right?
Mhm.
If he goes to regular public school, he gets this program with the free lunches, right? save the savings every month and this and that, right? And so if we look at it and say, yes, it makes sense, only public schools should get it. If by some program or by some way he's able to get into a private school,
I see what you mean.
and then the rules set up say, only
You can't
private,
get
only
it.
public.
Right.
Now he doesn't get that school lunch. Doesn't mean he doesn't necessarily need it, but now he's in a space where it's educationally, network wise, economically, his future opportunities could be increased. It could raise him out of the status of being in a Marcy. And
Right.
so
If he's able to get the lunch. So you're saying like if he couldn't get that lunch, he might not be able to go to that school because he couldn't really afford it.
it could be possible,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Or it makes it harder for them to be in that type of environment because
Right. Right.
they do have to pay for their lunch now.
Yeah. Yeah. So
So
it's like a disincentive almost, right? Where like it
it,
stifles your growth in some way.
potential, yeah, it
And
stifles that growth
yeah, yeah.
potential potentially.
I don't want to
Right.
I don't want to cast a wide net here and make it seem like private schools are so much better opportunity wise or network wise or development wise than
Sure.
public schools. I mean, I'm a product of New York City public schools, Queens public schools, and they happen to be
Yeah,
good
yeah.
ones. And I attribute that to uh, how well-rounded I think I've become, right? Being exposed to all kinds of people from all different socioeconomic backgrounds, all different religions, all different ethnicities, right? All different viewpoints. I think that's
Right.
important. Sometimes, again,
Sure.
not to generalize here, right? But sometimes I think when you're talking about a private school, especially the kind that you're describing,
Right.
okay, maybe there's more prestige available, but I think you may be putting your child in more of a bubble, which actually could be harmful to their development too.
In some cases, sure. And I'm not saying that in all cases
Yeah.
it's a better environment, but the reason why I use like let's say a state college versus Harvard, for example,
Mm-hmm.
it may not be necessarily that the teachers are that much better,
No.
but when the people sitting next to you are sons of politicians,
Right.
sons of daughters of CEOs, um, and those become your
You're right.
friends,
You're right.
when you graduate, the opportunity of starting a business with support, with connections, with network, and making it hugely successful go
Yeah.
up.
No, absolutely. That is true. And we talked about law school and the bar before. If you want to become a law professor, look at
Right.
where law professors graduated from law school, right? For the most part, it's Harvard, it's Yale, it's Columbia
Right.
Law, right? It's the top law schools in America. Now, there are some exceptions, like maybe you might be able to teach at the school you went to, or if you become
Right.
very well known in the field, maybe 25 years later, you can get, what I mean, that kind of thing. But generally speaking, especially if you're younger and you're just starting out, yeah, they're hiring professors almost exclusively from the top schools, and there's only a handful of them.
Right. I mean, and they're teaching the same law,
Right. Oh yeah, yeah,
but
exactly. No, I definitely agree with that too. Like I
but your
don't think
environment is different,
yes, and
and
that's
so
a
the
very great
network
point.
is different. Right.
Absolutely right.
If I graduate from Harvard,
Yep.
um, I could, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to start a business. I can get maybe a senator's son on the phone. Maybe I
Yeah.
can get,
Oh yeah. The
a
Supreme Court
CEO's
justice.
son. You know what I mean?
No, you're absolutely right. And like if you compare the curriculum at Harvard Law School to any other law school in the country, you're not going to find much of a difference. You're
Right.
not. It's not like you're getting a better quality education. That is not really what you're paying for, or what you're getting at the
Right.
prestigious school.
The
It's
network is really
it's
what's
the network,
beneficial.
and it's the
Yeah.
prestige, right? It's when you graduate, you can say, I went to Harvard, and just the opportunities open up that wouldn't be there for you otherwise. But it doesn't mean the
Right.
quality of the education is better.
Right. So part of what I was saying is in regards to the private schools is that, you know, if you can afford to be in those private schools, chances are the families are making a
Mhm.
little bit more money economically, higher positions potentially. Maybe they're business owners potentially. And so the student graduating, growing up in that environment with those friends, will potentially have a stronger network that can impact their future in a different way.
And so you want to open up access to those spaces, you're saying, by allowing them to have free lunch, because otherwise they wouldn't thrive in that environment potentially.
I think I think
Yeah.
there's a point to be discussed there that
Right.
possibility is there.
And think about the psychological effect too, just of, what if you're a kid going to school, maybe you're in a public school and some of your friends are in a private school. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Psychologically, should some of these kids be able to access the free lunch and not others? Right? Like they don't know.
Right.
They don't know. Oh, my school is taxpayer funded, and yours. They don't know that they're kids.
Right.
So, all right. Well, let's put it to the people, and I'm glad we had that discussion on the public versus private side of things, because that's what we do on Nuance, right? We look for the nuance of these issues, and I think that's what we want to hit on for this poll question, right? Because I think people hear something like free meals at school and they think that sounds like a wonderful idea. In fact, I looked at Governor Hochul's Facebook post when she was talking about this earlier, and she got a lot of support even from conservatives, and they say, comments said things like, I don't usually agree with you, but this I can get behind. So broadly, this does seem to have a lot of support, even beyond partisanship, right? Beyond party
People are
lines.
struggling.
Yes. But we want to really, I guess, ask about, do you think all students should get it, right? Should it apply to private schools as well? Like, what are your thoughts on that? Should there be limitations to this? So the poll question of the week is, do you agree that breakfast and lunch should be provided free of charge to all students in schools? And let us know, do you think it should only apply to public? Should it apply to everyone, right? Should private schools not get the benefit? Should only certain, like we said, what about religious schools, right? There's all different types. Charter schools are considered, I guess, their own category, right? They're not really public schools in a traditional sense, but they don't like to be referred to as private schools. They want to be public. So it's like, it's almost like they have like on the census non-Hispanic white, because it's that kind of thing, right? Like non-charter public, right? So there you go.
True, true. All right. So
All right. Well, speaking of polls, we did have a poll last week we can go over, right?
we did have a poll last week. And so last week we were talking about the proposal that's before the New York City Council that will require employers to disclose salary ranges to current employees for their current position. Doesn't
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't identify employees. So an employee could request to know what the salary range is for people in the company at that present moment, what they're getting paid. Doesn't say who it is, but just what the ranges are, just to increase transparency. So our question was, should employers be required to disclose the salary ranges to an employee for their position? And so we got an 88% yes and a 13% no.
Mm. So I would like to hear some of the comments from people who were saying no. Do they give any reasoning?
We only got a few comments on this one so far, but one person said a yes/no poll does not cover the continuum of responses for a very complex issue.
Mm-hmm.
And so they said, I'll demur from answering.
Well, give
Uh,
your answer. That's a cop out.
right. Well, someone followed up and said, do you care to elaborate on the continuum of pros and cons?
Right.
And that's my question there too, because I don't think there's a continuum here. It's should employers have to tell them or not? There's no like, well, in some cases they should. I don't see where the points could be.
Right. I mean, he did say pros and cons though, so maybe he thinks there are some benefits and some,
No, no, no. He said that a yes no does not cover the continuum of responses for a very complex
responses.
issue. The response to him was, do you care to elaborate on this continuum in quotes that you're talking about of pros and cons? So
Okay.
what do you mean by that?
So he's maybe suggesting that it isn't a yes no question, that it depends kind of question. So in some cases
Right.
yes, in some cases no.
Right. And this other guy is saying like, yeah, basically it sounds like the other guy is saying like, yeah, what cases are you talking about where it wouldn't be a yes or no? Like where's your middle ground
Yeah.
here? And I I,
I don't
I
know.
have the
I
same.
mean, maybe there's a case to be made though, that like we just talked about the distinction between public schools and private schools. What about public sector jobs versus private sector jobs, for example?
I think it should be the same.
Right. And that's a fair point. But do you understand that, right? Like a lot more is publicly available when it comes to public sector jobs because they're public sector, right? Because they're paid. These employees are paid with taxpayer money, and so in theory, the taxpayers have a right to know more about them. And so you can go online and find out stuff like that already, right? You can look at salary ranges of people in these various public jobs. It's, obviously private jobs are more confidential, right? So I can see a distinction to be made there. Not saying I think that's where
Mm.
you should draw the line, but maybe that's what this person is getting at. I don't know.
Right. Could be. It could be. They have not clarified their
Yeah,
position on there.
yeah.
So. Another comment here is someone said that I've worked for companies that publish salary ranges and it doesn't make a lot of difference. People know
Mm.
that a junior anything will make less than a senior anything. The job title usually indicates expected salary range. But that doesn't necessarily cover everything, though. Some people
Right.
could be, new hires because of the way that salary increases work. If you're in a job for 10 years and you only get 10%, a 2% increase every year, um, however, someone coming in could be hired at a higher rate than you because the market is increased. The job market is increased. You're
Mm-hmm.
not getting that. They're not going to be like, oh, you know what? You're in this job here. The hiring market has increased, so we're just going to bump your pay all the way up to what the market rate is. That doesn't happen, right? They're like, oh, you're getting 2% increase. So that's how someone that's in a position for 10 years could be making less and be a senior person in that role, as long as it's not management type of thing, could be somewhat of a senior person and make less than a new hire.
Well, they also said there's a difference between a junior associate and a senior associate, but those could be classified as two different positions, right? What if it is literally
Right.
senior associate, or one's a manager, or whatever title you want to give it. So
Right.
the question is, people on the same tier, right? People with the same job title, how much variation is there for them? And I think you would hope that will be somewhat level, although, like you said, someone with more experience, even in that same position, could be making more money. Um, but maybe you don't want to see too much of a discrepancy there.
Right. So they go on further. Someone's saying complicating this is in the private sector are bonuses and perks like company car, extra sick time.
That's all included in this law, though. This law that makes
So that
those
could be
salary
used to
ranges.
adjust it. I'm
No,
sorry?
but that's all included in this law, though. The law that require, or is that law yet, right? But it's a bill that is being proposed in the New York City Council. But if you read the legislation, it doesn't only cover a direct monetary compensation; it also covers benefits. And so,
Right.
right, that would have to be factored in to the range that's
Right.
provided.
Right. So and that makes sense. It's like, okay, well here's what the income portion is and here's the bonuses that they are receiving. This is all something that you should know as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I don't think that this what the person is raising here, I don't think that is something that should stop what the city council is proposing. Right? To say that it's too complicated, it's really not. It's like, okay, they're getting this much money and they get these perks and they get this bonus pay and these extra vacations. This is part of their package. So you know what you get in your package. You know what people in your position in different ranges are getting in their packages. So you have room to negotiate or to request or to look for opportunities elsewhere.
So I just did a thing. You know how we mentioned we have AI companion now, which maybe we should give a name to. I just asked AI companion, why might someone argue that salary ranges should only be provided to certain employees? Um, I don't think it really understood the question, because it said there are several arguments some organizations make for limiting salary range disclosure. And it goes on to list those arguments: competitive strategy, negotiation flexibility, et cetera, et cetera. But I was asking why someone would argue, as that commenter did, that some employees, or I guess employees of certain jobs or industries, should get that benefit and not others, right? Like why this is more complicated than just a yes, no. This should be a policy versus it shouldn't be.
Right.
Maybe I
Maybe
should
it didn't
rephrase the
quite get,
question.
yeah. Maybe it didn't quite get what it was being asked.
Now,
So,
this is not supposed to be just a regular chat bot. This is supposed to be listening to, to the Zoom, listening to the podcast and answering accordingly. So if it's paying attention, I mean, I don't know why it's not getting this.
hey, chatbot,
Wake
we're
up.
talking to you. Pay attention. What's going on here? You got a job to do.
Yeah. Yeah. You got to be in this too. All right. So why would someone argue that the law requiring disclosure should only apply to certain types of employees? Maybe that's more clear.
So they're supposed to be able to answer questions based on the real-time discussion, or
Yeah,
okay, that's
I think
interesting.
so. I haven't used it this way before, but in the past, it has given us a summary of the show
Right,
after it ended. So
right,
it's listening to what we're saying.
right. So, so this person goes on to say that while this is a noble idea, the reality is that the wage system is open to gaming by skilled and competent management. And I think that was one of your points last week when you were saying, well, what's to prevent them from just giving every employee a different title, and then saying that then they don't have to disclose the idea, or they can justify the wage differences.
Right.
So he says, so the proposal will achieve little except to make some managers a little more inventive in their quest to favor some select group of employees. So it's a little bit
Sure.
of a,
Yeah, I just so yeah, that's a good point. And as I said, I just rephrased the question for our AI companion here, and actually now got some pretty interesting responses as to, well, okay, still, I don't know. I guess you have to read between the lines here because it's still not really getting at like which jobs or like why certain jobs should get that benefit and not others. But
right.
maybe, maybe it is. It. Let's see.
Maybe it's not pulling our full real-time discussion to be able to be questioned on.
Well,
Maybe
we'll
it's
test
able to
that next.
summarize, but
We'll
yeah.
test that next. I can just say summarize, but before we do that, so here's some more information that I gave me, which may be useful. It says executive exemptions, high level positions often involve complex, individualized compensation packages with equity bonuses and perks that don't fit standard range formats. Specialized roles, unique or highly technical positions may have such variable market rates that posting ranges could be misleading or impractical. Small business burden. Companies with few employees argue that disclosure requirements create disproportionate administrative costs and competitive disadvantages. So I think it's starting to get into why maybe some industries are different or some jobs might be different. Contractor versus employee distinction, that's one. We talked about public versus private. What about
Mhm.
employee versus independent contractor? Some believe independent contractors and consultants should be exempt since their compensation structures differ significantly from traditional employees, although we said this law would require all of the compensation to be included.
Right.
Probationary periods, commission-based roles, security concerns, and here's an interesting one: geographical variations. Multi-location companies argue that roles spanning different markets make single-range disclosures problematic. These arguments typically center on practical implementation challenges rather than opposing transparency principles entirely. Okay, so the geographic one was interesting. I think it's still kind of
Yeah, that's
focusing on like why the law should not be passed, as opposed to
right.
why the law should say certain people should get it but not others.
Right. They're just
Yeah,
it's reasons why they don't want to or why they shouldn't have to tell
yeah,
people.
yeah.
That geographical one is that's a whole other discussion.
Right. But that is
Um
interesting.
it,
Think about that. If you have a company that spans multiple continents, even, right?
right.
And you're in your office in New York, or, well, let's say you're in a market where the cost of living and the salaries are a lot less than they are in New York, for
Well,
example.
that's what I was gonna say. Right.
And
So
then you
you've
get the
got
range and it comes back like a New York person getting 80,000. You're like, hey, I'm only getting 50,000. What the hell's going on? But maybe they're similar, right? But based on the markets and the cost of living.
right. And see yeah. That's one way. That's if the company is like like a multinational or a
Yeah.
multi-area type of company. There's another thing that I see, and it's a little bit of a sidebar, but related to it is where you've got, say, companies that have hiring for remote employees. Say they're in New York and they have remote employees. So some people, cost of living here in Japan is less than the United States in general, right? So some people are getting remote jobs with U.S. companies.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're getting let's say you're getting that $80,000 salary from a New York City, but you're living in a place where, rents might be $400 or $500 a month. So you're living large. So
Right.
some companies now are saying that their salary, even though their position, the salary will depend on where you're living, right? So if we're hiring for $80,000, if that was the position salary, but if you're living in a place where the cost of living is lower, then we're going to give a lower salary for that,
Sure. Sure.
which is I think is ridiculous. But
Uh,
anyway, it's a
yeah.
yeah.
But wouldn't you expect those salaries on average to be lower in places that have a lower cost of living?
Not if I'm working for a company that's in New York.
Okay. I see what you mean. Yeah.
I'm a remote employee working for a company in New York, and the job listing salary is 80,000, then I should be getting 80,000.
Right.
Wherever I'm
Right.
living, it
They
shouldn't
shouldn't
matter.
lower it. Right. They shouldn't lower it. Like, oh, you don't need this much money. Right. Yeah. You're still working for that
Right. And
company.
that's what they're doing in
Yeah.
some cases. Yeah.
So AI is paying attention, apparently, because I just said, why? No, hold on. I just said, summarize the most recent points made by Mike and Jay to see if it was listening. And yes, it is listening.
Okay. That's what's up. That's what's up.
Is
So,
it characterizing our points correctly? I'm not going to read this whole thing, but it does give wow. It writes a lot. It's
that's
going
what's
back to
up.
the school lunch. And they might have fallen asleep after the school lunch discussion though, because it says Mike and Jay. Maybe there's like a delay, a lag, because it says Mike and Jay just finished their discussion on providing free breakfast or lunch to all students, and it says Mike noted that if a school is already participating in a meal program for low income students, it makes sense to extend it to all students at that school. Jay acknowledged that for economically disadvantaged students who attend private schools through scholarships and financial aid, maintaining access to free meals could be important for their future opportunities. So, yeah.
Right. All right. So interesting, interesting feedback here. So,
Yeah. AI,
all
stay
right.
with us. Stay alert.
Stay on it. Stay on it. All right.
Yeah.
So we had a couple of other topics here.
Right. We can get through them quickly. I was going to say, speaking of staying on it, or in this case, not staying on it, right? ICE, it has been ruled off Rikers Island. Let's put it like that.
Right.
Right. We know Eric Adams, the mayor here in New York City, uh, reopened, right? Reopened the ICE office on Rikers Island, and this was subject to litigation, and there's a temporary restraining order against it. Well, the judge in that case today ruled that the office had to close. And I think the most interesting thing to come out of this case really is that a concern was raised by the judge, which was raised, of course, by the lawyers in the case, that Adams may have only been doing this, only bringing ICE back to Rikers Island as part of a deal with the presidential administration in exchange for his indictment to be dismissed.
This has been a question that was raised immediately upon Adams is somewhat of a turnaround or connection with the administration people because he was going through his legal troubles and then I don't know, kind of
Mm-hmm.
suddenly seemed to disappear once he started hanging around with a certain group. And so people raise that speculation. I believe that is one of the major reasons why he is having trouble in his reelection.
Oh,
Uh,
sure.
People lost faith. They're like, you've been bought out.
Well,
Um,
remember, there was an acting U.S. attorney, Danielle Sassoon, who resigned when this went down, right? When the charges were
right,
dropped. And she wrote a resignation letter. And in that letter, she said that the Adams attorneys repeatedly urged what amounted to a quid pro quo, right?
right,
Saying that they would assist with the department's immigration policies, meaning
right,
the federal right federal department, only if the indictment were dismissed. So that
right,
was part of why this U.S. attorney resigned. Then you had the U.S. border czar Tom Homan, right, make televised comments back in February
That's what
saying,
I was going to say.
yeah, that if Adams did not come through again to assist with the federal administration on immigration, quote unquote, I'll be in his office up his butt saying, where the hell is the agreement we came to? So you have someone
Right,
from the administration making reference to an agreement, right? That was in
right.
place. Now
And
we
they were
know
both.
charges were
They
dropped.
were
And this is, I just find it interesting and crazy even that, this apparently was cited in the decision, the legal decision, right, made by the judge deeming the ICE office on Rikers illegal.
Yeah, I mean they were. I saw that clip of Adams and Homan on that morning show, and they were sitting right next to each other when he said it. So it wasn't, it's not hearsay or something that was a hoax. And it raises a lot of questions.
Yeah, yeah.
It's very blatant. It raises way too many questions, and I think, the judge, it makes sense that the judge would cite that because it calls a lot of things into question. So.
All right. Well, since we don't have a lot of time, we do want to talk about some other things, I guess, that judges cited, whether those things make sense or not, right?
Yes, we have in my opinion, a very dire, um, and I know you don't like that term slippery slope, but this is definitely a slippery slope type of situation. So the Supreme Court just lifted the restrictions on the Trump immigration tactics that they were using in California. So probably a month ago by now, when the Trump administration's ICE agents were running through, and there was this big hullabaloo. You like that word? That big
I like
hullabaloo
that word. Yeah.
in
Yeah.
California, and they were basically using profiling tactics,
Right.
racial type profiling tactics to try to identify uh, immigrants, maybe undocumented immigrants,
Mhm.
for questioning or detainment. And so there was restrictions saying that you can't do that, and this was put in place by courts. And so the Supreme Court recently said, nope, they're allowed to do that. What makes it very, very, very dangerous,
Few-
first of all, is we're
Yeah.
not supposed to be doing that, right?
Right.
Making you're setting a Supreme Court precedent for racial profiling. And right now, from what I understand, it only applies to ICE and the border
Hmm.
agency
Hmm.
in carrying out these duties.
Right.
But it's such a small step to go from there to allowing your police officers to do the same thing.
Right. Sure.
And this formalizes at the
Now,
Supreme Court level racial
yeah.
profile.
And now I'm looking at the decision here, right? And I'm trying to analyze this as an attorney. One of the things to note is that there really is no reason cited by the majority in this
Right,
opinion, but there's a lengthy concurrence issued by Justice Kavanaugh. So he's going into, his thoughts on the matter, right? But it doesn't represent the official opinion of the court. They're silent as to their
right,
reasoning, right? So you can only read the justice concurrence as, he agrees with the result, but he's got his own thoughts, and it's the best we can do since we don't have anyone else speaking for the court. I guess he's the only one with the guts to stand up and say something. So we have to just read what he says for what it's worth. No, it's not the official opinion, but it's the closest we got to one, I guess.
Hmm.
Um, he
How
talks about,
strange is that?
yeah, I mean, it isn't necessarily strange for the court to rule on a matter without an opinion, but for something like this, I think you would expect or hope to see one, right? Because, like you said, so much is at stake. And I think
Right,
the nation deserves to know where the court stands on this, right? What parameters, if any, are being put in place here, as opposed to just this can go and there's no check, right? The judicial branch is supposed to be a check on the executive branch, right? For them to just say it can proceed without outlining any terms, without setting any boundaries or any limits or even giving the reasoning. Because, when you give reasoning, you're also setting limits in a sense, right? Because if you run
right,
afoul of that reasoning, whatever they outline, then you have some kind of guidance as to what's allowed and what isn't. Maybe here you have nothing to
right.
go off of. So you have Justin, like we said, Justice Kavanaugh giving a concurrence, meaning he agrees with the result, but he's giving his own thoughts on the matter. And he talks about standing, right? Which may be boring if you're not a lawyer, I guess, but I find it interesting, and I find his argument hard to process in a sense. I understand it in principle, but it's hard for me to understand how you would defeat the bar, how you would get over the bar, I guess, that he is setting here. And so to summarize
So
this,
before you go into that,
yeah,
could you explain exactly what standing is, just to be clear,
okay.
so people understand?
So when you bring a lawsuit to challenge something, or maybe you're suing for money, any kind of lawsuit, right? And that's going to be important here because it isn't a matter of people who felt they were wronged wanting to be compensated for that wrong. What they're seeking is forward-looking relief. In other words, they want the policy going forward to change, right? And so certainly that's a type of lawsuit you can bring, or a type of relief you can ask for, right? Challenging a law or a policy and saying it should no longer be able to continue because it runs afoul of the Constitution or federal law or whatever. But regardless, if you are the party bringing a lawsuit, right, you have to have what's called standing, meaning you have to be someone who's entitled to bring that lawsuit. And usually the way that's measured is, were you directly harmed as a result of this, right? So, for example, if I don't know, let's say I witnessed someone get beaten up down the road, right? I can't bring a lawsuit on behalf of the person who got beaten up, saying, I'm suing that other person and they should get money or something should happen, some injunction should be. No, I had nothing to do with it, right? I have to be the person who suffered the harm in order to be able to bring that lawsuit, right? Otherwise, anyone can sue on behalf of anyone, and
Right.
that wouldn't fly.
But
So
you could be arrested for not intervening, Seinfeld.
no, right, but that, as we know, that's not a real law,
Right,
right?
right, right, right.
So the question here is, did the people bringing the lawsuit have standing, meaning were they legally allowed to sue? And again, we said that it wasn't just that they were complaining about something that happened to them in the past. They want the policy to change in the future, right? And so they're seeking the government to be enjoined here. And the argument that was made by Kavanaugh was he didn't think that these people who brought the lawsuit, these plaintiffs, had standing, because he said, all right, it's one thing to challenge something that happened to you in the past and say, I want to be compensated for that. But if you're looking for forward relief and you're saying, I don't want this to be able to happen again, you have to show, according to Kavanaugh, that it's imminently likely to happen to you again. And he's saying that just because they were stopped and they're alleging illegal profiling in the past, they can't show that they're about to be illegally profiled in the same way again. And so they can't get that injunction, or they can't get the policy in the future to stop. They can only look to the past to what happened to them. But if they can't prove it's about to happen again, they can't have the court stop it from happening again because they're saying it's too speculative. You know what I mean? I understand it in principle, but the question is, when do you get past that bar? I mean, how could you ever really prove that it's going to happen again? You know what I mean? I think we were
Right.
talking before the show about, okay, maybe there are certain circumstances, like if you can show a pattern, right? Like this keeps happening to me, and maybe over the past 2 weeks, it's happened 20 times. So yeah, I've got the data showing it's probably going to happen again when I leave this courthouse, right? But
Right.
generally speaking, it seems like a pretty tough bar to get over, right? Like to say that this has happened before, but I can't show that's going to happen again because no one can prove it's going to happen in the future. You know what I mean?
Right. Or it at least it's a bar that could be easily explained away or wiggled around,
Right,
right?
right, right.
Because you could say like, yeah, look at all this, but it's such the opposition could easily there's a lot of avenues for them to say, well, yeah, that doesn't apply or this and that. Like,
It's speculative.
yeah,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
It's speculative. That's
Just because
such
it
an
happened
easy one.
before, right? That was a different day. It rained that day. You know what I mean? Like you could try to pull up something to say that whatever happened
Right.
before, it's not likely to happen in the future.
Right. And
So,
I think those who hold that position to allow it, they want it that way. They want those easy outs.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And like we said, it seemed like a tough bar to get across. The justice here, Kavanaugh, was citing a case that happened. Um, I believe it's the name of the case is Lyons. He keeps citing to this case
Mhm.
where an individual was put in a chokehold by a police officer. Here it is, City of Los Angeles versus Lyons, 1983. And The court in that case said, okay, you're saying that you were put in an illegal chokehold. You can sue. You have standing to sue for what happened to you. But if you're trying to enjoin the Los Angeles police from using these chokeholds again, you can't, according to this case, because you can't prove that they're going to do it to you again, right? Not, and notice it isn't that you can't prove that they're going to do it to someone again. They're
Right.
saying you can't prove they're going to do it to you again. It's too speculative to presume that you're going to get choked by the police again, and therefore you don't have standing to sue for forward-looking relief to say we want this policy enjoined going forward. That's the law. It just, I think, to a layperson, it probably sounds a little crazy, right? That is how the law is set up in that way.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Does it seem right? Like it seems like a game you almost can't win.
Right. Absolutely. You can't exactly say
Yeah.
that it's going to happen unless you've got a crystal ball, and then that's probably not admissible in court. So,
Right, right. Yeah, I think the best you could do is show a pattern, right?
right.
So it's like, okay, so now if I want to be the guy who stops this chokehold policy, I got to be choked multiple times. It's not enough to get hit for having me once. You know what I mean?
Right. And so like, yeah, I think that was one of the things I was talking about. It's like, how do you establish that pattern if that's the route? Because it's probably the only way you
Yeah,
can do it. But how do you even establish a pattern that would be
yeah.
acceptable to them, right? Do you take all the times you've been stopped and say, okay, well, I've been stopped 12 times. I've been choked 6 out of the 12 times. So there's a 50% likelihood that I'm going to be choked the next time I'm stopped. But then it's like, well,
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that you're going to be stopped again, though. That's
And
only if
by the
you're,
way, and by the way, it isn't only that you're likely to suffer it again, it's that it's immediately likely. It's real and immediate, as they say
right,
in this case, not conjectural or hypothetical. So even if you were able to show, oh, I've got all this data showing that, sometime over the course of the next month, I'm probably going to get choked again, or I'm probably going to be illegally profiled again. They're going to be like, that's not immediate. That's not happening the second you step outside this courthouse, right?
right, right, exactly. So it
Yeah.
it sets up, like you said, that impossible bar. Um, and
Yeah.
it's very much a frustrating on that point, and just scary on this erosion. In my opinion, it's an erosion of this of civil rights, and this idea that we've been trying to move toward, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then when you compare it with Supreme Court decision from last year, that I think it was last year, when they said when they overturned affirmative action, and they're saying that you can't basically use race or racial identity when admitting into colleges, but now you can use race or the appearance of race to determine whether to stop someone.
So let's continue here with Justice Kavanaugh's opinion, right? Because we said he dedicated some time to the standing argument, but then he went beyond that. And he said, even if, right, even if the plaintiffs here had standing, they would probably lose, right? He said that the government still should be able to continue this policy based on this idea of reasonable suspicion. And he's saying that there is a combination of factors, right? You have to look at everything, not just one thing. So to be fair, he says that you can't rely solely on someone's perceived ethnicity, right, to
Right.
make a decision as to whether to stop them or not. But that can be one factor that you weigh in. And he says that basically it's established that there's a high number of what he calls illegal immigrants in the Los Angeles area, that those individuals tend to gather in certain locations to seek daily work. Those individuals often work in certain kinds of jobs, such as day labor, landscaping, agriculture, or construction. Like, he's doing a lot of stereotyping here, but okay. Maybe
Right.
the
Yeah.
statistics back those points up as well, right? That these jobs do not require paperwork and are therefore especially attractive to illegal immigrants. And many of those illegally in the LA area come from Mexico or Central America and do not speak much English. So he's saying apparent ethnicity alone cannot furnish reasonable suspicion. However, it can be a quote unquote relevant factor when considered along with other salient factors. Um, so
Right.
you can't
Yeah.
base it
Very.
solely on that, but you can say, I took that into consideration, right, when figuring out whether to pursue this person.
Right. And yeah, and there's a lot of yeah, like I said, there's a lot of stereotyping he did there. So it's
Right.
really no wonder that he supported this measure.
He's
Uh,
yeah. No, you're right. He's like ICE agents can basically hang out at Home Depot and reasonably suspect the people there may be undocumented or illegal, as he calls them.
right. And you know, that's just what about citizens who are Latino that go to
Mhm.
Home Depot because they want to do some home improvements? You're
Oh, well,
subjecting them to
yeah,
potentially
yes,
being
yep,
harassed and
yes,
terrorized.
and he has something to say on that as well.
Uh-oh.
I thought the word was modest, but I'm not finding modest in the opinion here. But it was mentioned in the article. I thought that. Let me see. Let me go back to the New York Times article. But okay, well, it's interesting because the New York Times article uses the word modest. New York Times article says Kavanaugh portrayed the harm to people who are stopped and questioned despite being lawfully in the U.S., including citizens, as modest. So, okay, here's the
Yeah,
quote.
see
Here's the
that's
quote from actual quote from Kavanaugh. As for stops of those individuals who are legally in the country, the questioning in those circumstances is typically brief, and those individuals may promptly go free after making clear to the immigration officers that they are U.S. citizens or otherwise legally in the U.S. So he basically doesn't care that they're inconvenienced in that.
because he knows he's not going to be one
Right.
that's
Right.
stopped like that, right? People that look like him, um, people in his family are not going to be the ones stopped like
Mm-hmm.
that. And so, yeah, it's a modest inconvenience. Now, if it was the opposite, if they were looking for, what if this was, I don't know, the 50s and they were looking for Russians and they had
Yeah.
the Red
Yeah.
Scare going on and
Right.
people who looked like him were being stopped for that modest
Right.
inconvenience, he'd be upset about that.
Right. Of
I think
course.
his judgment would be quite different in that regard.
Yeah. Yeah. And constitutionally, we do have a principle of innocent until proven guilty. I know that
All right.
no one here is being deemed guilty just by being questioned, but still, I think there's a principle, there's a spirit of that, right? You're made to
Right.
feel guilty, right? Like you're being
Yeah.
accosted by the authorities for
Yeah.
not doing anything wrong. Like we said, what if you're a citizen? What if you're here lawfully? You got all your papers in check. You're still
Right.
going to be presumed in these scenarios to not be, or at least be suspected, right? There's
Right.
suspicion that you're not. And
Right.
why should these folks be subjected to that suspicion when it's not warranted?
Right. I mean, really, the burden of proof should be on the law enforcement in that regard. You should have proof that this person is undocumented or illegal or whatever you want to classify it as before you go and start harassing them. Because the potential for people who are not your target, who are not doing anything wrong, to be caught up into this is quite high and is an unacceptable risk in my opinion.
So I do want to make mention of the dissent by Justice Sotomayor, right?
Shout
And
out to like Ketanji Brown, Sotomayor, and them. Like
yeah, so
they've got to be stressing going to work every day these days.
their work is important, right? She's joined,
Yeah.
Sotomayor is by Justices Kagan and Brown Jackson. Um, the quote here is, of course, this is in dissent, right? This is the minority opinion, but they got to give their
Right.
dissent.
And this was along ideological lines, right? So the
Yes.
conservatives all voted for it,
Yeah.
and the so-called liberals voted against this.
So the quote by Sotomayor is: "The Fourth Amendment protects every individual's constitutional right to be free from arbitrary interference by law officers." She quotes a 1975 case that said it was unconstitutional for the Border Patrol to stop a car and question its occupants when the only ground for suspicion was they appeared to be of Mexican ancestry. The quote continues: "After today, that may no longer be true for those who happen to look a certain way, speak a certain way, and appear to work for a certain type of legitimate job that pays very little. Because this unconscionably irreconcilable, or because this is unconscionably irreconcilable with our nation's constitutional guarantees, I dissent."
Right.
So that's kind of what we
Um,
were talking to, the spirit of not being
right.
treated like a criminal or a suspect when you've done nothing wrong and you're working in a legitimate job. Like she says, it
Mhm.
often pays very little, right? You're being treated like a criminal or someone who's not supposed to be here and at all or doing that when you're
Right.
just trying to live your life and make an honest living.
Right. Absolutely. It's a very dangerous time. It's like you know, in some aspects, like the 60s never happened, you know.
Mhm.
Those types of fights are coming back up again.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
And why should these stereotypes be used as the basis for policy? I mean, is it even smart policy if their goal is to identify people who were here out of status, right? Is it smart for them to be like, oh, we're only going to look at people who speak Spanish and are looking for construction jobs outside Home Depot? I mean, that does that mean while they're profiling people in that way, they're missing out on people they should be trying to get right, should be pursuing because they're not using those stereotypical uh, boxes, right? Check boxes, I guess, uh, to pursue the policy. You know what I mean?
I
Like, what if someone, but what if someone who's really dangerous, who probably should be this on their radar, but it isn't because they don't speak Spanish and they're not looking for a construction job.
I think they're probably using both, but it's probably the low-hanging fruit idea,
Mm-hmm.
right? The idea, like, the administration wanted to round up massive numbers very quickly, and so I think they're probably using that as the method to do so. Anything else probably requires more investigation, or effort they may feel, or pushback. If you go after
Right.
the person that is the day laborer or someone that's working these smaller jobs and this and that, they probably don't have a strong support system to push back against the system, whereas someone else would probably have more of a support
But see,
system.
this is yes, but this is what I mean though. Like when I say that what's written in a legal opinion does set some parameters, even if it doesn't officially do so. We said this wasn't
Right.
even majority opinion. This is just Kavanaugh just saying what he felt like saying. But it's all we have to go off of now. And he does talk about specifically Hispanic people who speak Spanish who are gathered
Right.
outside certain
This is
locations
specific
in,
people
right
he's
in
talking
Los
about.
Angeles looking for certain kinds of jobs. Right. So his opinion here, even though it's just a concurrence, is in effect authorizing this type of profiling specifically
Ag- Against this group of people.
against this group of people, right?
Right.
And so if you're an ICE agent, right, if you're law enforcement, you might read this and think, okay, I've got the authority now to pursue this group of people, people I perceive to be in
Right.
this group, right? Based on what Kavanaugh wrote, maybe they don't perceive that they have that same authority for someone who's speaking Russian or something. You know what I mean? Because he specifically
Right.
said people who speak Spanish who are looking for construction jobs at Home Depot, basically. You know what I mean? So
Right.
uh, that's what I'm saying. The Supreme Court, in some way, seems to be sanctioning a certain type of racial profiling, and maybe inadvertently handcuffing officials from pursuing other types of people, not types of people, just people, because they didn't go out of their way to give them that authority.
Yeah, I think that's potentially one thing as well. But it's framing it in that way, it
Mhm.
shows that this is really not about undocumented status. This is really a targeted effort against a certain people,
Mhm.
right? Latino people, South American people. This is specific because
Yeah,
of that's what he put in there. He didn't talk about,
right.
there are people from different there are some undocumented folks from, Asia, there are people from Europe. None of that was mentioned.
And to be fair, that's not what the case was about. So, they
Right.
write about what the lawyers are arguing in the case, right? And so
Right.
he's not just going to write about everything. Um, the case was specifically about Hispanic immigrants or Hispanic, I guess, people in the US who were being profiled this way, right? And so
Right.
that's why those stats and that data and right those arguments all came into the case. But I'm just saying the way that it's written, he didn't have to do that. If you're an agent now, you might think, oh, like maybe I can't go after this person who does seem really suspicious to me because I might lose my job, or I might think that, or someone might say that I'm doing something illegal. But if you read Kavanaugh's opinion on these Hispanic immigrants who are outside Home Depot, he seems to give me the authority to do whatever I want with them. So I'm going to
Right.
only go after them, right? But when it comes to people who don't fit that category, maybe I'm going
Right.
to hold back because I don't seem to have the
Right.
right the ability or the authorization from the Supreme Court to do that.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. Yeah. So that's a big problem. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, and how long is it gonna be until someone attempts to roll this out across all groups, not just a border type of
oh yeah.
situation, but the
I think
police itself?
I think it's there. I think it's, like you call it a slippery slope. I don't know if it's much of a slope. I think it's like a half step, right? I think
Right.
it's just you're there, right? The argument is that these agents have to rely on their experience and the totality of the circumstances, including all the
Right.
data that's available to them to make these calls. Well, all right,
Right.
yeah, you can easily say all people who commit this type of crime, tend to be a member of this particular group. Therefore, it's fair game to treat them as suspects, right? We have
Yeah.
reasonable suspicion because the data everyone knows that people who do this are usually just this type of person. So it's
Right.
basically the same argument.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, right now, at least it seems like it's very focused on this specific area
Right.
with ICE and going after undocumented folks. But the potential is definitely there to, step across to everyone.
Yeah. I mean, it reminds me of the Bloomberg quote. Do you remember when Bloomberg was pursuing stop and frisk in New York City?
Mm,
And he was criticized because he instructed the police to spend most of their time doing this in black and brown neighborhoods, right? They, people pointed out the disparities there, and who's getting stopped and frisked in this. Look
right,
who's right the victims of this. And Bloomberg basically doubled down, and he said that's where they should be. That's where the crime is. They should be in the black and brown neighborhoods doing that. It kind of reminds me of this, where Kavanaugh
right,
is saying, "Yeah, I should go to Home Depot and look for people who speak Spanish. That's where the illegal immigrants congregate."
right. Yeah, yeah. And it discounts a lot of factors. In the
Mm-hmm.
Bloomberg situation, it discounts a lot of factors like, you know, it could be it's not necessarily maybe that's where the crime is, but it could also be that's where the surveillance is
Mm-hmm.
that's pulling up these numbers. So you've got data in that area, right?
Right.
If you're watching if you're watching Wall Street with the same sort of focus, you're probably going to see a lot of crimes happening there. And then you could
There's
make the
also
same
different types of crimes are being prosecuted and
Sure.
right pursued with different levels of vigor, right? Like if you talk
Sure.
about white collar crime on Wall Street that goes unchecked, you're going to find a lot of that.
Right. That affects more people
Right.
and in more devastating ways. Well, maybe not more devastating ways. It depends on what the crime is, but it
Yeah.
can affect more people. Um, so yeah, I think these types of questions are some of the reasons why we've kind of at least thought that, we shouldn't be going after people via stereotypes and profiling,
Yeah,
because
and,
there
and look at,
are
by the way, and that's a great point because look at what the Bloomberg data showed us in New York
right.
City. Right? At the time, it was about 9 out of 10. I think it was 88% of the time that police officers in New York City stopped and frisked people with quote unquote reasonable suspicion because that was legal standard, right? Set by the Supreme
Right.
Court. You have to have reasonable suspicion the person is armed and dangerous and committing or about to commit a crime. Well, eight more than 8 out of 10 times, right? About 9 out of 10 times, the person was completely innocent, not committing any
Yep.
crime, right? Not armed and dangerous, completely innocent. And so if
Yep.
you're wrong 9 times out of 10, that means that you're certainly not only stopping people with reasonable suspicion. That's not reasonable, right?
Right.
Right. And
Absolutely.
so it shows that the profiling that was done there uh, wasn't productive. I mean,
Right.
if Bloomberg was right that oh yeah, that's what a crime is. Of course they should be doing that. Well, then their numbers wouldn't have been so off, right?
Right. And that also highlights the failure of executing on reasonable suspicion.
Yeah.
So how do you define reasonable suspicion? Are they reasonable just because they're in that neighborhood, because they're black,
Yes.
because they're in
Right.
front of Home Depot? Is that reasonable?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly right. Right. So when Kavanaugh says, well, these factors present, the ones we outline, right? Hispanic, Spanish speaking, in front of Home Depot looking for a construction job. That's basically what he said. If
Yeah.
those factors are present, he said, you have reasonable suspicion. All right. Well, if that's the case, I want them to do the same type of analysis we did in New York City with stop and frisk. How many times, right? How many people questioned by ICE turned out to be undocumented under those
Right.
conditions? And if you find out that, 9 out of 10 of them are not undocumented or, some number like that, well, then how could you continue to say that that's reasonable suspicion?
Right. Now, this is just weaponizing prejudice
Yeah.
instead. And that's a big it's a big danger right there.
And I don't
So
know what the number is, but I would like to
no.
see that data. If they're gonna, open this up and say, hey, they're allowed to do it, well, then you better show us the result of what they're doing.
Right. And what also concerns me is we've just had this massive push to recruit uh,
Mm-hmm.
a number of ICE agents. And there was huge incentives they were trying to hand out, right? Like six figures and signing bonuses and this and that. So I would imagine there's probably quite a number of inexperienced new agents on the streets right now. So to give them the power of their experience and expertise to harass people, to me just doesn't work. They don't have it. They don't have that experience. It's prejudice that they're relying on.
Yeah, yeah, right, right. And they're being told now by the
Yeah,
Supreme Court to profile.
absolutely. And that's a problem. That's a
Yeah,
big problem.
yeah. And by the way, last point on this, wasn't there a law in Arizona, SB4, I think it was, or SB6? Let's look it up. Maybe we can even ask our AI friend here. That was very controversial, and I believe was overturned.
And what was it regarding?
It was regarding the same thing. It was stopping people based on suspicion that they were illegal immigrants, quote unquote, and
Uh-huh.
being able to use factors like their ethnicity, right? So they can look at someone who appears to be Hispanic and ask them for their ID.
Okay, so there was let's see. Arizona had a controversial immigration profiling law that was SB 1070 from 2010.
Mm-hmm.
But as of 2024, 2025, similar legislation, often referenced as Arizona SB4 or SB6 in the media, but formerly SB 1164, has advanced that allows or requires law enforcement to check immigration status during interactions when there is reasonable suspicion someone might be in the country illegally.
Mm.
Um, so what's the status? It says variants of these laws continue to be debated, amended, and sometimes vetoed, depending on political shifts. As of 2025, there are ongoing lawsuits, protests, and public debate about the constitutionality and practical impacts of Arizona's immigration enforcement laws. So, according to this, it seems like they're still trying to push it. But I would think with this new ruling, this precedent, they would have support to push those laws forward.
Right,
They could
right.
say, look, well, the Supreme Court just said something similar to what we're saying here.
Although keep in mind, Supreme Court technically didn't say anything, right? Because they didn't issue it. Maybe that's why they didn't.
Well, they
Framing
could,
this. But they could try to
true.
quote the Kavanaugh concurrence, right?
They could quote the Kavanaugh, but I think couldn't they also look at and say, well, maybe they didn't give reason and they didn't give any sort of, write up about it, but the fact that they allowed that type of stereotyping to go forward in these ICE raids does
Right.
communicate that this is a valid uh, tactic that we can use.
Someone could try that, but then you could always say, listen, even Kavanaugh said he would probably strike it down based on standing. So maybe that was the reason. The plaintiffs didn't have standing, which says nothing about the actual law or policy, right? There's no actual
Right.
Supreme Court. holding here that you can quote to
Right.
use as precedent. Like, yeah, you can, if you're a lawyer, I guess, arguing for this type of law, you could always point to that decision and say, hey, well, they had a chance to overturn a similar law and didn't, or a policy and
Right.
didn't, right? I just don't know how much precedential value it's going to have,
Mhm.
considering there was no real opinion here.
Right. And like you said, could that be why he didn't give that? They didn't give any sort of
It's
opinion
it's
on it.
uh, it's, it's certainly possible. It's like a kind of like a cop out, right? Like
Right.
we're gonna take the administration side on this, but we don't really want to go down that slippery slope, right? We don't want to open Pandora's box here, so we're not gonna
Right.
say anything about it, right? Like mum's the word. Could be.
Yeah. So, yeah, this is gonna be this is not gonna end well. Not at
Okay,
all.
so here I just did some further research on SB 1070 in Arizona. It said some provisions, such as the quote unquote show me your papers requirement, were blocked by courts,
Hmm.
but some provisions were not blocked.
Right.
The Supreme Court, this is a different time, too. Like we said, this is a law from 2010, challenged, I believe, in 2012. But it says the U.S. Supreme Court blocked several major parts of SB 1070, finding them unconstitutional.
Right. I think the present fight is at least looks like here SB 1164
Okay.
um is more the current thing that's popping off right now. Um, it's just it's crazy to think about that all of these things that are happening and it just keeps coming up.
Well, why don't you give us a bottom line on all this?
The bottom line is we need to be more vigilant. This is not going to stop. I saw a post the other day that they're almost halfway through all of the things that were on the Project 2025 list, that they've already got past about half of everything, and a lot of other things are in progress. Uh, and we can't get comfortable with these types of violations to our civil rights and to the normalcy that we have come to expect over since the civil rights era, essentially. Um, People need to voice and speak out and push back against these things, because there is barely a step from it being applied in these specific situations to it being rolled out nationwide. Because when you make that argument that this is being done for the safety, right? Oh, we have to protect the people. You can pretty much justify anything in that regard. And just blindly following that is going to lead us to a place that we should not go. Um, and so, yeah, we have to definitely defy those. So, shout out in that essence, in that spirit, shout out to the mayor of Chicago.
Mayor of Chicago.
Yes, so Trump, the administration has threatened that they're going to roll out National Guard in Chicago, just like DC, and Matt basically said going to war with Chicago. The mayor in the past week and a half has come out and said that we will, I guess he signed an executive order or something like that, where they're going to defy or they're not going to cooperate with the National Guard coming into, and they've directed their local police and their forces not to cooperate with ICE coming in. He said the governor is on board. They agree with it. Their law enforcement is on board. They agree with it. They're not going to do that. So recently, there's been one of the largest protests in recent history in Chicago, protesting ICE coming in and doing these things and this government takeover. So, he's standing publicly in defiance of these types of erosions of normalcy and civil rights. And so,
Well, the Benjamin Franklin quote comes to mind as well, right? Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety.
yeah, that's it definitely applies here. Um, it's
Yeah.
it's not gonna end really well. I just saw a post that someone posted I guess it was a tweet from someone back during the election talking about, yeah, I'm going to vote for this administration. I'm going to vote for Trump, so we could take back our country and own the libs. And then they posted a recent
Oh,
screenshot of their tweets talking about, well, there goes my business. We can't afford to
right.
survive these tariffs. Why are these things affecting us good folks? And it's like you messed
I saw
around and
one.
you found
Yeah,
out.
I know. I saw one similar to that situation where her fiance, I think, ended up getting deported, and then she regretted her
Yes.
vote as well. So
Yeah. Right. You don't
yeah,
play with the we don't you don't play with the fire.
you don't be
You
exactly. You don't play with fire, and like we said, I think it was 2 weeks ago now. There's really nothing more patriotic than defending the Constitution and standing up for people's rights, right? Even if they're not your own rights, it's the people's
right.
rights, right? It's like we said, a theme of this episode: we're all in this together. We should be all in this together as a society, right? So
Right.
it's only about you as an individual, right? It's about protecting the institutions of liberty, right? Of our rights, of our Constitution. I mean, these are all important things, and like you said, you don't want to play with that fire.
Right. Absolutely not. So,
All right,
all right. Well, where can they find us?
they can find us everywhere. Things can be found wherever you get your podcast. We definitely would appreciate if you subscribe or get those podcast episodes sent directly to your device when they drop. It's Nuance with Mike Scala and Jay Carter. We're on social media, right? We're on YouTube, Instagram. The polls, people ask us as well. The polls get posted to Daily Kos, as KOS, right? Is there an easy way to find the polls when they drop on there?
Yeah, they're actually on they're put up under the account Independent.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's the user handle. Um, so shout out to Terrence Harding in the comments here, uh, aka Slop Funk Dust.
Yes. Yes. What's up? What's up?
Yeah, as she's talking about the situation we were talking about, ICE stop and frisk never helped anyone. We know it just put people in prisons. He cited Arizona SB 12,
Mm,
and that Sheriff Joe Arpio set that off.
Ohio.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, along with Tent City that got shut down.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
A lot of controversial law around immigration happened in Arizona.
yeah, uh, yeah. Sheriff Joe Arpio. Glad he's not talking anymore. Jesus Christ, that guy was
Yeah.
crazy.
Well, I guess what we mean to say is we've got work to do.
Absolutely.
And we thank you all for checking us out. God willing, right? We'll catch you next time. Have a good night. Have a good week.